the global growth engine, how that's impacting the global growth story.
So for China, as another country, we downgraded growth quite significantly in April. We brought it down to around 4.4%. And that was because of the fact that they had far more outbreaks of COVID. They were putting more lockdowns. The lockdowns have now gone from being more targeted to being much more broad-based. And that took a big hit. Retail sales, for instance, took a big hit this April. So I do think that there are serious downside risks to our forecast for China at this point. China has spillovers to the rest of the world. It is a very big part of global trade. And so when China slows down, you see especially countries in the region, Asia, East Asia especially, that get affected negatively by it. Supply chain disruptions are another important factor. One of the reasons that has fed inflation around the world, and this is going to continue because of that. But even countries in Europe, like Germany, that are manufacturing hubs and that trade a lot with China, are going to face the spillover from China slowing down.
But it's a tough spot from a policy perspective because they've taken a zero COVID stance. And you've written a lot on how the world should end the pandemic and get out of it. What's your sense of the kind of policy maneuvers Xi Jinping and the Chinese leadership are practicing, and how could this impact China's growth from here on?
So the zero COVID strategy of China served it very well. I mean, to be clear, in 2020 and 21, it was an economy that had very targeted lockdowns, was able to bring back activity extremely quickly. Now, of course, we're grappling with a whole new variant, which is far more transmissible. And so the question is, what does one do at this point? Vaccinations remain the best hope for dealing with this pandemic. If you look at the recent signs on China's vaccines, it takes about 3 shots to get protection against severe disease and death. And if you look at the population in China, if you look at those people above the age of 80, only 20% have had 3 shots. So there is a real trade-off, which is that if you open up, that you could end up with many more deaths. The strategy then has to be to ramp up the vaccination, especially the 3rd dose, to as many people as they can. Then afterwards, which they can remove these restrictions that they have right now, which are really quite strict.
The pandemic brought out the challenges of having a supply chain that's very dependent on China. And one of the hopes, at least in India, was that with the China plus one model, there's a possibility that some part of global manufacturing, as it moves out of China, could start coming towards India. In the conversations that you're having and the data that you're studying, do you think India has gone as far as it should have or could have in capitalizing on that opportunity?
I mean, this has always been the pivot that one expected to see. Even without the pandemic, the cost of production has gone up in China. So you would expect to see some of the manufacturing move outside of China. And other countries have benefited from it. India has benefited also from increasing its exports. But at the same time, there are still some barriers that need to be fixed. And these are more like policies at home, also in terms of ports and infrastructure, being able to do just-in-time manufacturing and delivery. I mean, all of that requires a lot of investment, and we go back to the standard set of reforms that are needed, be it on labor market, be it building up on business environment and so on. So all of those will need to continue. But yes, this is a moment to be able to seize, to be able to make the...
So merchandise exports in India up in a big way, and the government's, because of the production-linked incentive schemes, hoping that a lot of manufacturing will start coming into India, or some of it they're already beginning to see. You spoke of more reforms that are required. Can you spell those out for us in terms of going beyond what the government has already delivered on? What would you individually and the IMF like to see?
The important thing to be a big part of the global supply chain is to be able to produce at very big scale. And that has always been a challenge for the Indian economy. Yes, you have some firms that are able to produce at large scale, but the vast majority of them are smaller in size. They don't employ those many people. They produce at small scale. So policies that can generate a bigger, can encourage scale is one important measure. But that requires the same reforms on land and labor, which has been taking time to happen in India. I think infrastructure is going very well in terms of the investment that they've seen, and even the recent projects are all very good. So pushing on that front would be very important. Becoming a part of trade agreements, I think that still has to be a priority, which is India is engaging with the world. Putting too many restrictions on imports of goods hampers your ability to then use the inputs that you need to export out of the country. So that's another area where I think India could make, could move on.
You spoke of tariff barriers. Not just is it happening in India, it seems to be a global phenomenon. Do you see the pandemic accelerating the trend towards not necessarily the end of globalization, but a reconfiguration of globalization where countries put their national interests first, especially given the fact that you have populist regimes in so many different countries?
Well, we're certainly seeing more restrictions go up. I mean, even India with its export restrictions on wheat, we're seeing around 30 countries that since the start of the war have put export restrictions of some kind on food and energy and other key commodities. This is a huge problem for the global economy and for the global recovery. We need a way to deal with this. We need to increase supply of all of these products and not restrict it, and that is a major problem. In terms of the more broader trend, we are concerned about fragmentation, which is that even if global trade doesn't necessarily come down, that the world becomes more fragmented into geo-economic and geopolitical blocks. And that also has deep consequences, because we know that when you have technological decoupling, when you have an increase in trade policy uncertainty, we've estimated the effects on world GDP are quite large. We are certainly concerned about this, but the whole point, I guess, of fora like this, the World Economic Forum also, is that we bring together different stakeholders so that we can be in conversation and just remind each other about the benefits of integration.
But Russia isn't here, China only marginally represented. Therefore, what's your view on this growing concern that the world could be fragmenting at least into two blocks? One is the Chinese-Russian bloc and, say, another bloc led by America.
I don't think we have to take it as a given that would happen. What is clearly the case is that companies around the world, countries are concerned about resilience, about the fact that we had the pandemic and your supply chain breakdowns that came from it. Now you have the war, the security risks associated with trading partners. So countries are going to try to build resilience. Companies are going to try to build resilience. That requires diversifying your production across more countries than you've done in the past. I think this is also an opportunity for India in that sense, because India becomes a market in which they can diversify too. But what we should avoid is creating trade policy that is going to then fragment the world, generate high levels of uncertainty, and we lose the gains. I don't think that train has left the station yet. So we need to make sure that doesn't happen.
What's your outlook on inflation in India and globally? We've seen in India the government cut excise duty quite sharply in a hope to bring fuel prices down. Is that going to be just temporary relief given the tailwinds that we're seeing?
Inflation in India, the most recent numbers, 7.8%. That would be now the third month in a row where inflation is above the band of 4 to 6%. So I think it was right that the RBI moved off cycle and raised interest rates. It will most likely need to continue to do that going forward.
Do you have an estimate of how much the interest rates could or should rise by?
I think there's so much uncertainty about the impact of what we're seeing around the world on India's growth that, it's not a prediction I would make at this point. But like all central bankers are doing, which is to be very data dependent and to move flexibly and in scale with the data that's coming in, right? That you don't want to be too little. So I think that's what, of course, RBI also is doing and what they should continue to do. Yes, and another feature that we're seeing in India and in other countries is this cut in excise duties and giving additional subsidies on fertilizer and food and so on. I mean, the main trade-off, of course, is you have to keep in mind the fact that fiscal deficits are quite large. Many countries have high levels of debt. So there's only that much fiscal space to provide these kinds of support measures. The best way to do it is, frankly, to provide targeted transfers to poor households and extremely vulnerable businesses. That's the first best way to do it. Now, there are challenges in doing it in that particular way, which is why you see governments just simply cutting taxes.
You've been speaking about this for a while. It now seems from some of the reportage that's come out of India that the government's warming up to the idea of income benefit transfers to those who need it the most. That you still believe is the most effective policy intervention?
That is certainly the most effective and non-distortive way, and also friendly to your fiscal situation in dealing with the kinds of price increases, the kinds of shocks that we're seeing
Are there other
now.
things India could do? or other countries can do to try and tame the inflation racket?
I think what countries like India can do, which is a big wheat producer, is increase supply.
So you're still pushing for India to export? Wheat?
It would be great if countries like India were to incentivize more production of wheat. I think that would be
But I spoke to Piyush Goyal yesterday, our Minister for Commerce and Industry, and the point he made was we have to put national interests first. We had a massive heat wave, wheat production came down. We can't have a situation where Indians are starving, while of course we'll keep our commitments, but we can't have a situation where our people suffer.
To that, I would say that the way you prevent your people from suffering, it's the poor who suffer in such circumstances. And again, it would be the cash transfer route that one would go to make those, to be able to have them, for them food to be affordable, right? On the other hand, we would like India's farmers to be able to benefit from the rising prices and to be able, and therefore then incentivize them to produce more. So I think that's the ideal way to do it. But that said, I understand that there are constraints on how effectively to do all of this.
Agrarian reform in India got derailed because of the massive farmer protests that we saw. Is that something that you were disappointed with? You were pushing for farm reforms, even if this wasn't the full package, but it was a step in the right direction?
We certainly see a need for reforms in the agricultural sector in India in terms of raising productivity, raising incomes at that level too. I mean, there are many reforms that are needed. Of course, one has to get the political support for it to make it happen. But that's one area. But in addition to that, if I may just pivot to the fact that I think schooling and education is probably another area where a lot of attention is needed. In this pandemic, schools were closed for a long period of time. Lost learning, big hit to human capital. And I think that really needs to be rectified.
We've seen a meltdown in the crypto markets, especially when it comes to some stable coins and a fall in crypto prices. In India, trading volumes come down because of taxation imposed by the government. What's your sense of how this space is likely to evolve? Because many young people watching you would be deeply disappointed with the tax that the government has put and that UPI can no longer be used for crypto trading. And that seems, given how they were excited about crypto trading, that seems to be a big bummer for them.
I think everybody should just recognize the fact that crypto assets are an extremely risky speculative asset class. It's gone from being a $3 trillion market to $1.5 trillion market in about 6 months. So it's very quick moves. It's not a panacea. It's not like an easy return investment. So there are very large risks you are taking. And with any risky asset, there has to be regulation.
So how do you look at crypto personally? Would you ever, have you invested even $1 in it, or you stay away completely?
I've stayed away completely, but that's just me and my level of risk aversion.
Between coming here in winter, in January, when it's snowing and everyone's slipping, to coming now when it's a bit hot in this suit, which one do you prefer and which one's working well for you?
Well, I prefer warmer weather, so.
You prefer warmer weather?
I prefer warmer weather.
This goes against the idea of being here in Davos. Everyone's talking about climate change and how hot it is being here at this time.
This is summer. It's supposed to be warm.
This has been an interesting conversation. I see your mind has got a hand going, so we're out of time. Lots of more questions, but we'll leave it for another day. Gita Gopinath, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome from sunny Davos. I am Siddharth Zarabi and with me Hardeep Puri, the Minister for Petroleum and Natural Gas. Mr. Puri, welcome to Business Today and the India Today studio here. It's perhaps a coincidence that we didn't know that we would be chatting to you just 24 hours after a significant cut in additional excise duty by the government and the consequent reduction in oil prices, petroleum and diesel. Your first thoughts as to the reason it happened now and what it really means from a price perspective?
First of all, it's not a standalone decision. मैं आपको याद करवाना चाह रहा हूं कि नवंबर 4 तारीख को the first petrol and diesel excise cut took place. You remember 5 rupees and 10 rupees petrol and diesel excise was cut. It was a decision taken by the government, by the Prime Minister in particular, who has been personally monitoring the very difficult terrain through which we are having to navigate. COVID was difficult enough. COVID was difficult enough. We are not still out of it, no matter which way you look at it. I mean, the 80 million people, 800 million people, 80 crore of our citizens who are fed, given 3 meals a day, that process, that scheme is still on.
And that
2 billion vaccine doses distributed to our citizens. This is reflective of the Prime Minister's personal concern for the welfare of the common man, Aam Aadmi.
Ji.
You know, interestingly, normally when prices are very high, you would expect that the elasticity or the lack of elasticity, you would expect that demand would drop. But this month's figures which I saw, petrol consumption is 14% higher than the corresponding period the previous month. Diesel also, the earlier month. Diesel, I think also 2% or so. But that overall increase in consumption cannot conceal the fact. It conceals and it should not be allowed to conceal. I would say that the decision has been widely welcomed. It has been applauded. We got some carping noises, but you know, some of us who are at the wrong side of the political spectrum, and we are fast atrophying or disappearing in terms of our political relevance. They will carp, but it doesn't matter.
The Prime Minister had some time ago made a pointed reference to the responsibility of states when it comes to oil sector duties. As we all know, it's not part of GST. Obviously, the BJP ruled states have responded. Many haven't, and now, as I know at least, I think a few states have started to respond after yesterday's cut. What lies behind this state-center gap in this?
You know, if we were having an academic argument about different stakeholders in a system of cooperative federalism, it's a center's right to raise revenue, it's a state's right to raise revenue. That would not be a focused discussion. The fact of the matter is that a citizen of India, whether he or she lives in a BJP-ruled state or in a non-BJP government, where there's a non-BJP government, that citizen has the same rights. And there are people from all segments of society. So how can you allow a situation where a BJP-ruled state, petrol is 15 rupees cheaper than in a non-BJP state? I told my friend, the Honorable Chief Minister of Delhi, and I use my words very carefully, I said, आप कम नहीं करना चाह रहे हैं, पर मैं आपको बताता हूँ, आपकी जियोग्राफिकल लोकेशन ऐसी है कि आपके पास और कोई चॉइस नहीं रहेगी. वही हुआ, उन्होंने नहीं कम किया पहली रिडक्शन के बाद, तो उनको लगा कि 20%, after a few days, 20% there was a shortage. Now, you can't go all the way from a place X to Y to fill up long distance. But if you are in a place like Delhi and you're traveling to Faridabad or Gurgaon, etc., तो instead of filling here, you fill there.
वो तो border पता भी नहीं लग रहा है.
Border पता भी नहीं. तो जब 20% डीलर्स को फर्क पड़ा और ये हुआ, तो उन्होंने भी कम कर दिया.
मंत्री जी, केजरीवाल जी ने क्यों नहीं घटाए फिर?
उस समय क्यों नहीं घटाए
जी?
उनको लगता था कि इसको अगर रहो तो रेवेन्यू बहुत बढ़ती है. और उनका मैं अब क्या बताऊं, इज अ फ्रेंड ऑफ माइन, वो विज्ञापन पे, एडवर्टाइजमेंट पे तकड़ा खर्चा है उनका. सो आई डोंट नो, आई एम सेइंग दिस नॉट सीरियसली, बट आई थिंक इवन ही रियलाइज ही हैड टू रिड्यूस फाइनली.
आपको क्या लगता है कि अब जो ये हुआ है, सारे स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स को क्या कॉरेस्पॉन्डिंग कट्स करने चाहिए?
मैंने आपका सवाल का जवाब नहीं दिया क्योंकि वी जस्ट वेरी ऑन. आपको याद होगा कि प्रधानमंत्री जी ने सिर्फ इसके बारे चर्चा नहीं की. प्रधानमंत्री जी ने एक मीटिंग की वर्चुअल मुख्यमंत्रियों के साथ, वहां पे तो उन्होंने बहुत फोर्सफुली कहा. कुछ लोग हमारे जो ऑपोजिशन स्टेट्स के चीफ मिनिस्टर, उनके नाराज भी हुए काफी कि उन्होंने ऐसा बोल दिया. पता हकीकत यह है कि दे डिडंट डू इट. नाउ फॉर इंस्टेंस, you have a situation where, see, if you say that I have a right to raise revenue, but you reduce the revenue, you reduce the duties on imported alcohol. I'm not taking any names, from 300 to 150%. Another one brought it from 300 down to 120%. Now, I think after a while, you have to answer this in the court of the people.
पुरी साहब, राज्यों से जब हम बात करते हैं तो वो ये कहते हैं कि हमें जीएसटी का कॉम्पेंसेशन पूरा नहीं मिला, जीएसटी में आगे बढ़ना चाहिए, कॉम्पेंसेशन फॉर्मूला बदलनी चाहिए, और अब एक कानूनी फैसला भी आ गया है कि राज्यों के अधिकार जीएसटी को लेके.
नहीं, देखिए ऐसा है, पहली बात तो किसी ने कहा, एक स्टेट गवर्नमेंट है, मैं उस पे यहाँ पे, क्योंकि ये मामला न्यायालय पे तक पे पहुंच गया, मैं आपको ज्यादा डिटेल में कहा, इसको जीएसटी में लाइए. आपको याद होगा जब जीएसटी काउंसिल के एक सेशन हो रही थी लखनऊ में, तो एक केरला हाईकोर्ट का शायद था, निर्णय भी था कि आप इसको काउंसिल में सामने रखिए। तो जब काउंसिल में सामने रखा तो किसने उसकी किसका विरोध किया? ऑपोजिशन स्टेट। देखिए, ये चर्चा चलती रहेगी। In a system of cooperative federalism, democracy, this charcha to a certain point is healthy. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating. अब मैंने आपको इसमें नहीं किया, वो नहीं किया। देखिए, आप कहते हैं अगर सेंटर ने एक्साइज किया, आप ये कैलकुलेट कर लिए आपने कितने स्टेट टैक्सेस उसमें कलेक्ट किए जी, उसमें से देख लीजिए। या तो आप ये पोजीशन ले लीजिए, हम समझते हैं कि ये इसका जो लाभ है हम अपने नागरिकों, हमारे जो स्टेट में रहते हैं उन तक नहीं पहुंचाना चाहते, तब तो फिर कोई बात ही नहीं है।
तेल बढ़ता है, एक्साइज बढ़ती है, कभी घटती है। ये जो तेल का खेल है मंत्री जी, प्राइसिंग को लेके, और मैंने इसमें एक पत्रकार के नाते बहुत साल काम किया है। दो मुद्दे सर, ये फॉरेन पैरिटी पे प्राइसिंग होती है और उसको लेके जो ऑयल मार्केटिंग कंपनीज हैं उनको भी मुनाफा कमाना है, बट हैं तो सरकार की कंपनी, देश के नागरिक की कंपनी।
देखिए,
तेल के खेल में कुछ बदलाव होना चाहिए क्या फंडामेंटल?
देखिए, आप ऐसा है, दो एक्सट्रीम्स है, एक तो एडमिनिस्ट्रेड प्राइसिंग का सिस्टम और दूसरा है डीरेगुलेटेड सिस्टम जी। आपको याद,
मैं आपको इंटरप्ट करूंगा, क्षमा करिएगा। डीरेगुलेटेड भी है पर 5 महीने के लिए आपने रोका।
नहीं,
उस टाइम चुनाव थे मंत्री जी।
नहीं, गलत बात है ये। आप मेरे को बड़ी खुशी से इंटरप्ट करिए, पर मैं बेसिक फैक्ट्स रख दूं। जब कांग्रेस की सरकार थी तो मुझे याद है कि शायद 2010 में पेट्रोल के प्राइस जो है डीरेगुलेट हो गए थे, और 2014 में डीजल के जी, वो हमारी सरकार के बिल्कुल 2-3 महीने बाद। देखिए, ऐसा है, पेट्रोल का दाम किस पे डिपेंड करता है? इंटरनेशनल प्राइस जी, द कॉस्ट ऑफ इंश्योरेंस एंड फ्रेट जी, exchange rate, which can be significant.
बिल्कुल.
It depends on refining margin, etc. आप किसी OMC को कह रहे हैं ये सरकार की कंपनी है, उससे I take issue. देखिए, they are responsible corporate citizens. जी. अभी आप एक हुआ है कि हमारी 2 कंपनीज हैं जो बिल्कुल प्राइवेट सेक्टर की हैं, they have adopted a different path. अब मैं नाम नहीं लूंगा जी। अच्छा, हमारी कंपनीज ये नहीं है स्थिति के सुबह उठते हैं और उनका कोई CMD मुझे फोन करता है, मंत्री जी बताइए क्या हुआ। देखिए, अगर आप करेंगे चुनाव के दौरान उन्होंने नहीं बढ़ाया, अरे चुनाव तो हमारे देश में, मैं आपको क्या बताऊं, 5 साल में हर साल होते हैं, और होते हैं तो एक चुनाव खत्म होता है, दूसरा शुरू हो जाता है।
पहले रुके 5 महीने, फिर बड़े, फिर 40-45 दिन रुके।
Some of them are, sorry to cut.
So what would you say, sir, should be our policy towards this? मैंने आपके फ्यूचर के सवाल पूछा।
It's a private, these are private entities. I am in no position to tell them that you have to stop this thing. You know, they are watching the situation. Now, after all, it's in their interest also that the markets remain stable, because ultimately for a while they may not be able to pass on their do the full recovery because they're making money on refining margins or petrochemical. But some of these are Fortune 500 companies and are highly respectable, so they are in a situation where they will watch the situation, and as responsible citizens there may come a time where they may suddenly start, I don't know. But today we are in the situation where the government is assuming its responsibility for excise cut. I'm hoping the state governments will reduce their ad valorem VAT, and all the other players will play so that there is energy security, availability of energy and affordability.
My final question, as a former member and a stellar one at that of the Indian Foreign Service representing India along with other cabinet colleagues at the world's largest gathering of the business elite and the political elite, what's the message that you are hearing from people about India, having navigated the pandemic, having done pretty decently well to manage?
Dekhiye, it's not the message what I'm hearing here. Today, thanks to media organizations like yourselves, thanks to the fact that we are integrated, that news travels through different channels and mediums with breakneck speed, India is a good story. India is a good story for 3-4 major reasons. That it was able to face the challenges of a very basic existential nature during the pandemic. हमारा healthcare sector was in neglect. हमारी सरकार बनने से पहले जो हमारी पब्लिक सेक्टर में वैक्सीन मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कैपेसिटी थी पब्लिक सेक्टर, उसको हमने बंद करवा दिया, तो कोई ज़रूरत नहीं। We were not only able to manufacture a domestic vaccine. One of our companies, which is using research done at Oxford University and, patented by AstraZeneca, they've done well. A pure Indian company has done exceptionally well. And today, your vaccine has efficacy. I don't want to point you in the direction of countries which became vaccine producers and the talk is कि 38% उनकी vaccine efficacy है या वहाँ पे उसके consequences हुए. मेरा वो काम नहीं. दुनिया भर से there is undiluted appreciation, a little bit of envy also, I would say, that India was able to manage not only its healthcare system, but on so many other respects. Our foreign direct investment, देखिए जो अभी latest figures आए हैं, $84 billion. What was the foreign direct investment coming in 2004? $4 billion. 20 गुना. तेल is not a person जिसके पे छाप लगा होता है. पता है कहीं तेल निकलता है कहीं से. Place X. Right? There are different kinds of, some have high sulfur content, some don't. There people buy, a ship goes from here to there. But how can I tell you, पिछले साल हमने जो financial year है, हमारा total imports were 0.2% of our total imports. उसका कारण है, उसकी geographical कारण है कि आपको अगर आपके देश के neighborhood में तेल मिलेगा तो वहां से खरीदोगे. पर अगर आपको खरीदना पड़ेगा तो लोग खरीदेंगे. देखिए इसमें कोई hesitation नहीं है. So what I'm saying is biofuels, exploration and production, E&P, we are raising it from कितने हमारे सेडिमेंट्री बेसिन है 26 है 7-8 थे मैं पूरे सब में ले जा रहे हैं. If I have my way, there'll be a well in every backyard, including yours and mine.
You didn't speak about the IFS issue because we have had
IFS में
it's being called arrogant. Your cabinet colleague has answered that question.
No, जयशंकर जी ने जवाब दे दिया. मैं एक ही चीज कहना चाहूँ, ये IAS का UPS के इम्तिहान होता है, जैसे इम्तिहान देना पड़ता है, फिर पास होते हैं, फिर अंदर आते हैं. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Puri, as always. That was Union Minister Hardeep Singh Puri from Davos answering questions that are important for you and me. If you've been, thank you very much for watching.
After 2 years of paralyzing pandemic, the world is ready to bounce back. Will shifting power centers make this India's big moment? Risk, resilience and revival on the agenda. What's India's role in the global rebalance? India's top world watcher takes you to the front lines of the global high table with top minds from politics and business for the biggest global brainstorm. Live and exclusive coverage only on India Today TV.
Death, destruction, continuous shelling, continuous bombing, injuries and devastation till the extent the eyes can see. That is the story of Ukraine. But far away from what the eyes can see, let us shift focus to what the eyes can't see, at least not vividly. Mental trauma afflicted by war and similar distressing situations that will eventually lead to post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD in many persons being witness to the distressing images of war. Even on TV, these pictures can cause severe post-traumatic stress disorder. What then is PTSD? PTSD is a disorder characterized by failure to recover after experiencing or witnessing a terrifying event. The condition may last months or years with triggers that can bring back memories of the trauma accompanied by intense emotional and physical reactions.
PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder is experiencing the stress post-trauma for a long time. Trauma is when you experience death, accident, threat to life, major injury, to yourself, to a loved one, or through observation, you experience that trauma. When you develop PTSD, because you've gone through this trauma, which happens in abuse, which happens in war.
Symptoms may include nightmares or flashbacks, avoidance of situations that bring back the trauma, heightened reactivity to stimuli, anxiety or depressed mood.
You also experience changes in your cognition and mood, meaning the way you think. Thinking may become negative. Moods may become negative. You feel disconnected. You feel low. You feel negative about yourself and the world. And you also can experience symptoms of avoidance, which means you avoid any kind of trigger that can be related to trauma, or that may even result into your avoiding people, avoiding going out.
For those returning from war-ravaged Ukraine, PTSD will not be uncommon. In fact, for those even witnessing the war from close quarters, like soldiers in Russia, for example, PTSD is not going to be uncommon. It is for this reason that post-traumatic disorder is also called battle fatigue syndrome. The symptoms include PTSD and panic attacks, chest pain, a fast pounding heartbeat, difficulty breathing, dizziness, shaking or trembling, stomach pain.
History is at a turning point, from the war in Ukraine to the climate and food crisis. From the much-wanted metaverse to unstable cryptocurrencies, get a ringside view to the ideas and challenges that are shaping the post-pandemic world. Catch me all through this week on India Today and Business Today as I bring you all the latest from a World Economic Forum that's being held this time in summer in Davos.
Tonight at 9 p.m. on the news today with me, Rajdeep Sardesai. 48 hours after the centre slashes fuel prices, several state governments are yet to take the cue. Why are states reluctant to slash fuel taxes? Tamil Nadu's Finance Minister Dr. Palanivel Thiagarajan will be among my newsmakers tonight. Also, the Indo-Pacific Economic Partnership being crafted in Tokyo. What does it really mean for India in the region? And as pre-monsoon showers spread across the country, what kind of monsoon can we expect? All that and much more on the news today. News without the noise.
History is at a turning point. That's the key theme of the World Economic Forum at Davos in 2022. And to talk about this, we're joined by the president of WEF, Borge Brende. Thank you so much for your time, and it's fantastic to be back here in Davos. Thank you.
Welcome back, and so great to be here and great to be with you.
So tell us what's changed. We know the weather is different. We're sweating inside the suit. There's no snow, nobody's slipping. But that apart, what's changed for you at Davos 2022?
So we are very happy to be back and also to see people in person. But it is a very challenging backdrop globally. I think it's the most challenging geopolitical and geoeconomic time in decades. And what we had hoped for being a real nice recovery economically after COVID is now a very slow, very weak recovery that we have to make sure is not turning into a recession.
So Davos has for decades been about globalization, global solutions to global problems. But one of the things that's happened over the past few years, partly on account of the pandemic and partly on account of various other global factors, is the move away from globalization. So is the world, in a sense, moving away from the idea of Davos?
So what we have seen also with the pandemic, COVID, is that COVID anywhere is COVID everywhere. On climate change, it doesn't matter where the emissions happen, if it's in China or in the US, it affects us all. And look at the temperature in India this spring. It's not sustainable. So all the most pressing challenges, including the inflation that we're facing with now, are global. And the only way to then deal with it is also with global solutions. It doesn't look too good, though, because we are faced with such a fractured world. But I do still believe that trading with each other, also investing in each other's countries, are building prosperity, and it's a win-win.
So, sure, that is the idea that you push at the World Economic Forum, but it's also an idea which is now being contested. You know, given what's happened, for example, in China during the pandemic, and then what we've seen happen in Shanghai with the entire city shutting down, a lot of countries now wanting to move away more towards regional participation or trading and investing in allies rather than globalization in the true sense.
I think there will be some readjustments. And, you know, this thinking that just in time is not sufficient. You also have to think about just in case when it comes to global value chains. Of course, you need to have vaccines and medical equipment a bit closer. You can't wait for 2 weeks with, for ships that don't arrive. But at the same time, we also have to be very conscious that we have doubled the global GDP the last 3 decades. We have then, at the same time, we have increased the global trade with 4 times. And that has been the driving engine for the prosperity. And in 30 years, we have reduced the global poverty. People living in extreme poverty from 42% to 10%. So there has to be something also in the recipe that we have been following with global trade that has been incredibly important. So it's important then that we don't lose the baby with the bathwater.
The World Economic Forum in 2022 happens in the midst of the Ukraine-Russia war. Vladimir Putin used to be a star speaker here at WEF. There was a big Russia lounge. Now there's a Russian war crimes center. There's a Ukraine house. So how central is what's happening in Ukraine to the conversations here at the World Economic Forum?
Especially in Europe, it plays a major role because it is very serious when one country then just try to invade another country and take over the control of it. Russia hasn't been successful. They were going to take Kiev in 3 days, and now they're still struggling. But this has also a huge economic impact for Europe, especially on the energy side. So the key to finding a solution is now with Mr. Putin, because he broke international law and did not respect the territorial integrity of another country. So of course, if he goes back to sticking to the UN Charter, then there is a new situation. But I'm not that optimistic short term.
A lot of Russian oligarchs used to be star guests over here. Now we've seen Russia has been blocked. How are you dealing with Russian participation here in the context of some of the corporates feeling that targeting industrialists is unfair because they're not responsible for Putin's war?
So, firstly, I think the key for unlocking this is with Mr. Putin. If he then goes back to the UN Charter and also stick to international law, then there is another situation. Many of these companies that you just mentioned are also now sanctioned by the UK government, the US government, Europe, Australia, Japan. So we could not even have them here because they are sanctioned because of what is happening in Ukraine. What the future will bring, we don't know. It's now up to the Russians themselves and Mr. Putin if he wants to continue on the path he has chosen no, or he wants to go back and start collaborating again.
I remember coming here a few years ago when President Xi Jinping spoke very passionately about globalization and trade. Now, given all that's happened, is WEF re-evaluating where China stands in the global conversation on account of what we've seen play out over the last couple of years?
I think the important role of the World Economic Forum is still to be a platform where we bring also people together that don't necessarily look at things the same way. So we have room for China, we have room for India, we have room for also the US and many African countries and Latin Americans. The reason why we also took a clear stand on Russia is that they are breaking international law, and there is a war going on not very far from here. So that's a special case. But I do hope that in the years to come, we will see increased collaboration again and not increased of a fractured world, because we're going to pay a high price for that. A fractured world will also lead to less prosperity, less trade will lead to less growth, and that means less jobs.
One of the key themes at WEF this year is global resilience in food supply systems, in energy systems. What are the ideas that you're pushing, wanting world leaders to embrace so as to be able to build that global resilience? Because the last challenge was the pandemic, the current challenge is the war. Who knows what the next challenge will be?
Exactly. We still have blind spots, I'm afraid. So we should be better at identifying potential blind spots in the future, and then we should build resilience. And I think resilience is really about an insurance that we then are introducing. We know that food prices have increased a lot, fertilizers doubled. We are also potentially seeing new pandemics around the corner. To invest now to avoid that these end up in new very critical situations is worth it. So the cost of inaction far exceeds the cost of action in many of these areas.
In the estimates of the World Economic Forum, how far back will this war push the global economic recovery?
There is a combination of several factors. The COVID situation now in China, second largest economy in the world, is potentially even exporting deflation. China has been a big demander for oil, gas, other minerals, and etc. COVID is still around and can also increase again. Then the war is also creating less of economic growth in Europe. Europe has to find alternative energy sources. So Europe is the largest market in the world. And if the largest market in the world starts growing slower, it will impact all of us. So I think we're lucky if we can go out of this year with 3% global growth. And hopefully we're able to also sustain global growth next year. For India, though, I'm a little bit more optimistic. I think India still can carry 7 to 8% economic growth this year. But India is also relying on the global markets and demand for its products. So if there is a recession, of course, that will also hit India quite significantly down the road.
I read your piece in Business Today where you spoke of India emerging as a global innovation hub. Can you share some thoughts on how you see India in this post-pandemic world and the role that India could play in trying to boost global recovery?
India has unique skills and have a very young population that works in the benefit of India. But India also of course, needs to build further skills, also has to start competing more with the US and China on the new technologies, being artificial intelligence, big data, also on digital currencies. So India has to use this unique opportunity to also modernize its economy. I'm very bullish on behalf of India long term. I'm also medium term, short term. There are challenges, but there are challenges for all of us.
How do you see the emergence of blockchain technologies and also on cryptocurrency given the current meltdown? What's the kind of advocacy that you're doing on cryptocurrencies given that policy is being looked at very closely in India and in so many other countries?
We need traffic rules when it comes to digital currencies and crypto. And currently there are very few traffic rules. And we just have to make sure that crypto is not used to avoid authorities, taxes, and regulations. But in some instances, the whole new fintech, that you can do all your banking on your mobile devices, and etc., is also a huge opportunity for many developing countries and emerging economies to really leapfrog, because a lot of people in these countries don't even have a bank account, and a bank account is a prerequisite also for being integrated more in the economy. So there are pros and cons.
The last couple of years have seen global inequality go up in a big way, and Davos is often criticized for being a big boy, rich people's club. How are you looking at growing inequality, and what is it that you're attempting to do to try and, to the extent possible, alleviate inequality?
So it's true that we have seen growing inequalities, especially in industrialized countries. In fact, in emerging economies and in some developing countries, we also have seen that a billion people have been lifted out of poverty. But in some developed countries, they have not been even willing to use the tools they have for redistribution of wealth. So if your economy is growing, part of it can also be redistributed by use of taxes. But of course, the taxes cannot be so high that it kills growth. So there is a tricky balance. But I think every country it's in its interest to create a very good educational system. If the kids are not able, also in the public schools, to learn how to write and also mathematics and all this, you will not be able to succeed in the fourth industrial revolution. So my advice to countries is to invest in infrastructure, invest in education, and also invest in gender equality, because in most countries, 50% of the population, I think in all countries, are women, and they should be part of the workforce, of course.
Okay, we've seen in Sri Lanka recently a complete economic meltdown attributed to a whole host of factors, including China's debt grip, also misplaced priorities on organic farming. So how are you viewing what's happened in Sri Lanka and your policy advocacy for trying to prevent this from happening elsewhere?
It is very saddening to see the total meltdown and the Sri Lanka defaulting. I think Sri Lanka now has to look through what was major mistakes during the last years. And I think India can also play a very constructive role now, because Sri Lanka has to rebuild its economy. It's a middle-income country, so it's not a poor country, but they have mismanaged their economy and with devastating results. So a lot at stake now. They really have to get their act together.
Well, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. Wish you a fantastic World Economic Forum. Borge Brende, thank you for your time. Thank you, sir.
No, thank you. It's great to see you, and thank you for all your insightful questions.
Thank you so much.
We live in a modern-day Handmaid's Tale. The weights are tilted unequally. Women still don't have their bodily rights. India remains one of the few countries in the world that does not treat non-consensual sex within marriage as rape. If the wife is not under 15 years of age, sexual acts by a man with his own wife is not rape. And the latest word by the High Court further confirms this.
Split verdict जो है, ये society का situation को दर्शाता है. क्योंकि ये मानना कि इस मुद्दे पे सिर्फ एक ही राय हो सकता है इज नॉट पॉसिबल. लेकिन मैं ये भी क्लैरिफाई कर देता हूँ कि कोई ये किसी का पोजीशन ये नहीं हो सकता है कि मैरिज के अंदर या मैरिज के नाम पे कुछ भी हो सकता है. पोजीशन किसी का ये है ही नहीं, ना हमारा कोर्ट के सामने ये था.
Section 375 of the Indian Penal Code 1860 says that sexual acts by a man on a woman against her free will or consent would constitute rape. But there are two exceptions to this. The first exception says that a medical procedure or intervention shall not constitute rape. And the second exception states that sexual intercourse or sexual acts by a man with his own wife, if the wife is not under 15 years of age, would not constitute rape. This provision is being constitutionally tested.
Also, let us not forget that rape in this country also includes anal sex. It also enforced anal sex, right? It also includes forced facilitation of gang rape. And husbands are exempt from all of this.
The first petition challenging the constitutional validity of the law was filed in court 7 years ago, that's in 2015. The petitioners have said the law violates a married woman's right.
The Ukraine-Russia crisis has the world by storm. It has been a month-long of war and devastation. Amid the crisis, many celebrities are supporting war by sending various aids to Ukraine. Max Smerkovsky. Max is a native of Ukraine. He partnered with Core Response to support Ukraine. He has documented his escape from the country and showcased the horrible conditions of Ukraine. Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds. The couple are doubling every dollar up to $1 million donated to USA's UNHCR. It is a non-profit organization that provides critical support to refugees in an attempt to save, protect and rebuild lives of the affected. Queen Elizabeth. Among the numerous celebrities is Queen of England, Elizabeth. She donated a generous amount of money to Ukraine's disaster management community. Gigi Hadid. Supermodel Gigi has promised to donate all her earnings from fall 2022 fashion shows to those suffering from Ukraine-Russia invasion. David and Victoria Beckham. The couple launched an emergency appeal from the Seven Fund for UNICEF. It is to provide immediate aid to affected families and children. Dua Lipa. Pop star Dua is using her platform Service 95 to support Ukraine's fight for freedom. Service 95 is a free newsletter service. On this, Dua is sharing several ways to help and assist during a humanitarian crisis. Elina Svitolina. Ukrainian tennis player Elina said she will donate all of her prize money from the next tournaments to support Ukraine. Vera Farmiga. Actress Vera Farmiga stood in solidarity with Ukraine. She has been sharing donation links, fact sheets to educate, ways to volunteer and events to attend. Across the world, thousands are affected from the Ukraine-Russia war. According to the UN, 1,119 have been killed and 1,790 are injured. These are just a few among many celebrities standing against the Russia-Ukraine war.
Today is, the launch to the world of a fully operational urban airport. The first time ever in the world that there's an operational piece of infrastructure of this kind.
I think you'll see some operations this decade, but I think the 2030s will really be the decade of advanced air mobility, and you'll really start to see this be more ubiquitous from that point on.
History is at a turning point, from the war in Ukraine to the climate and food crisis. From the much-wanted metaverse to unstable cryptocurrencies, get a ringside view to the ideas and challenges that are shaping the post-pandemic world. Catch me all through this week on India Today and Business Today as I bring you all the latest from a World Economic Forum that's being held this time in summer in Davos.
Tonight at 9 p.m. on the news today with me, Hardeep Sardesai. 48 hours after the centre slashes fuel prices, several state governments are yet to take the cue. Why are states reluctant to slash fuel taxes? Tamil Nadu's Finance Minister Dr. Palanivel Thiagarajan will be among my